Okay, so this is Human Population Dynamics. This is video 5. This is our last video, and we're starting on slide 87. So urbanization is the process by which people form cities. It's a very basic process. They're coming in to the site of industry, to the site of jobs, to work, and moving away from countryside. They're coming in and consolidating. The bad side to this is that you end up with slums for housing, you end up with fecal snow, which is a whole lot more waste product, stuff in the air, and you end up with a lot more disease because people are packed in so closely together. Not such a big problem in the U.S. because the housing conditions and working conditions are better. There have been a lot of laws passed that regulate housing, regulate air and water quality, and that tends to minimize this problem. Not to say that it's not there at all in the U.S., but much smaller than in other countries. The problem with urban areas is that everything has to be imported. All of the resources have to come in from somewhere. So that means that the food, the water, the energy, all that is made elsewhere. The food is grown on farms out in the country. The water is brought in from somewhere. Energy is brought in from somewhere, so it's not a place where you can go down the street and buy something that was grown this morning unless it's been brought in. A lot of waste products, again, with so many people living pretty much right on top of each other. Waste is increased, byproduct increased, so air pollution, water pollution, land pollution is higher. 44% of people in the entire world live in urban areas, but that's only 5% of the land available. So almost half of the people in the world live in only 5% of the land. And they consume 3/4 of the world's resources. So it's pretty crazy numbers when you think about it. Reasons for the world hunger issues. Unequal distribution of food. There's plenty of food out there. The problem is getting it to the people that need it, and that's the issue. Arable land is land that can be farmed, and we're losing that. Increasing population, we've talked about, and increasing poverty in developing countries. We've talked about this a lot. So dramatic a change in the past century is the Industrial Revolution, modern medicine, improvements in hygiene, healthcare, quality of life, etc., etc. So to make sure, not only do we have to make sure we get enough food to survive, but we have to make sure that we have enough nutrition, good food, to actually be healthy. So we're trying to look at new food crops, not just the basics, but do more diversity in our plant species in order to increase where and what we grow and sell and what we eat, rather than just doing the basics. We need to improve distribution of food and make sure that gets to all the different people. So it's not just the fact that you have enough rice or have enough meat to eat, but also that you have the fruit and the vegetables and everything that you need. The land that's dedicated to grain production rather than meat production has to be increased. Right now we have a lot of land in meat production, but we do not have enough in grain production. So we need to make sure that that has changed for the better. And then we also need to work on crop irrigation, watering crops, more efficient raising of crops for developing countries, so they're not wasting a lot of land, time, resources for a good output. Urbanization has obviously had a big environmental pressure with increased waste, increased people. There's a lot of stress on the environment in that area. Population growth has increased urbanization, has therefore increased environmental pressure. But the population growth is reduced because generally birth rates are lower in urban areas than in rural areas. There's increased education, and increased birth control available in cities is not as easily obtainable in rural areas. And the education is the big one. Okay, so China, like I said, their method for maintaining population was really overall very good, overall successful, very controversial, especially when it first came out, but they've modified since then and changed it. And it's not that you can't have more than one children, it's that you're penalized indirectly for having more than one child. So you can have 2 children, but your taxes will be much higher. There are other fees associated with it. You cannot take as many deductions on your taxes. Your benefits are not as good. Food allotments are not as good. You may have to share the same amount of food between 3 children or 2 children. So it really is in your best interest to only have the number of children that you want, or that the government wants you to have. So in China, for example, if they only have 1 child, they get extra food, they get more money, they get better housing, they get better medical care, bonuses, better education for their children, preferential treatment in employment when their child enters the job market, all that kind of stuff. So all of that lends itself to create a better population dynamic. And that's modified a lot from what it was when it first entered. The problem is that there's still a strong preference for male children. So in China, a lot of girls are aborted at a higher rate than boys. Some infant girls are killed so that the couple can try again to have a boy. Male children sometimes are taken care of better. So this is still a problem, especially in the lower income parts of China. Family planning is a big factor in reducing the number of births and abortions in most of the world. If you're thinking ahead and planning for what you want and what happens, as opposed to just letting chance, just letting, whatever happens. If you can plan, okay, I know I want 2 children and I will have them when I'm best able to have them, when I'm best able to provide for them, works so much better than starting to have children, when you're in your early teens or 20s and just going through the rest of your life. So we've talked about this a lot already. Women will have fewer children if they're educated, if they have a paying job, and if they're listened to. And that comes back to that problem in India where the women are just not a functioning part of the society. They're not allowed to have a voice, and therefore they don't feel that they have the right to make any decisions, so they just continue to have children whether they want to or not. So slow population growth, this is summarizing everything. This is kind of combining everything that we've talked about for the whole thing. The best way to slow population growth: invest in family planning, make people aware, give them birth control, give them options. This is what you can do. This is how you track. This is when you're going to get pregnant and how you're going to get pregnant, so that they can avoid that, or so they can try when it's time to try. Reducing poverty, increasing the educational level, and elevating the status of women. Okay, so again, this is summarizing slides. All factors we've talked about already. Nothing new here, but to put everything together for you at the end of the thing, this would be definitely something that I would make sure that I know all of these factors affecting birth and fertility rates. Looking at contraceptive methods, this was just a really interesting diagram that I wanted to show you guys. Even in the 1990s, where you would think that birth control is readily available in the entire world, not so much. Almost half of the people did not have or chose not to use any method of birth control. Whereas you would think, the stuff that we kind of take for granted here in the U.S. as condoms and the pill is a relatively small percentage. Female sterilization happens a lot in other countries, not always in a positive way. But it just surprised me that, so many people just didn't have the resources or the knowledge to use contraceptive methods. In 1994, there was a global summit on population and development. It was held in Cairo in Egypt, and it encouraged action to stabilize the world's population at 7.8 billion instead of the 11 to 12 billion. So that was the goal. That was what all the countries met and decided this is what we want to try to achieve. The ways that they wanted to try and achieve that is they wanted to do increase the family planning services. Again, that was a big step. Increase health care, encourage development of policies, so like make India's policy a little bit better, better run, more resources, etc. and then improve the status of women. So it goes back to that other list. These are the things that impact population, so these are the things that we have to work on. To continue with the goals, education is always a big one. Men's involvement, so making sure that women had a voice and making sure that men don't feel that, having babies is their job. Men don't feel that having babies is women's job. Make sure that men are involved in the planning, in the process, in the responsibility. So it's not just the mom taking care of the baby. It's the mom and the dad working on taking care of the baby. Eradicating poverty is obviously always desirable, a huge, sometimes seeming impossible step, but steps can be made to work toward it. And then making everything more efficient is really the goal. Crops, food, hunger, healthcare, all of that needs to be more efficient in order to better meet our needs. Okay, so to sustain a population, we've already talked about, is 2 children per woman. Right now, or in 2006, we're at 2.7 children, so we're getting a lot closer. Developed countries are 1.6. What we really need to work on is the developing countries, which should not come as a surprise. These are the ones that need the better education. These are the ones that need the women's rights more. So really, we're at where we need to be in developed countries. It's the developing countries that need our assistance in family planning. Okay, looking at how our population affects the environment and affects natural populations of other animals, plants, other resources. Our big use of technology, seems like a great plan, and there's a lot of good things to it, but you also have to consider the other side of that, in that we've used our technology to change so much around us that we've threatened the survival of other species, that we perhaps even have reduced our own quality of life, and that will impact not only us, but other species in the world. So, for example, some of the things that technology has changed, we've reduced biodiversity, we have increased the primary productivity of the earth, perhaps past its carrying capacity, depending on who you talk to. Increasing genetic resistance of pest species and disease-causing bacteria. So we're making strains because we're making all these great medicines that combat disease. After time, the disease gets the hang of it, and so it's now resistant to that medicine, in which case you have to make another medicine. So it's this spiral that you can't not make the medicine, but what are you going to do when everything is resistant? You're making these killer bacteria that are so resistant to almost everything you can throw at them. Eliminated natural predators. Our top-down control, control of an ecosystem. We'll talk a lot about looking at the top predators in the ecosystem and how they control the health of the ecosystem. So if you lose, for example, all of the sharks or all the wolves died off in Yellowstone, and then therefore the deer and the moose and the caribou population went through the roof and got a lot of disease, and everything just kind of went crazy because you lost that top predator. Deliberate or accidental introduction of harmful species into communities, again with the genetic engineering, which we'll talk about later, with all that craziness. That changes what's going on with more travel. We're moving stuff around more. Using resources faster than they can be replenished. So we're growing so much more, we're making so much more that we're using stuff up sometimes faster than we can fix it, or faster than it can be replenished. Interfering with global cycles, energy flow processes, all of that stuff, because we're making our own energy changing so much. And then relying on fossil fuels because they have so much pollution to add to the environment, obviously is not good for the environment, and therefore we really need to start to work on relying on something else. So all of these things is stuff that we're going to be talking about through the rest of the year in different units. What I wanted to show to you, to tie into you, is the fact that this technology, our increased technology, has led to those changes that we'll look at later.